All right, so I've left our preference table up from that pizza example that we were talking about last time. So that club that's ordering a pizza and had their voters or their members vote on which toppings they preferred, so they ranked them. And I want to ask a couple questions about it. So the first question I want to ask is, how many total people voted? Well, let's take a look at the table for a minute and try and see if we can figure it out. Remember, a couple of our voters, right? We had Jim's vote was one of these 5, and like Susie's vote was one of those 2. So remember, the numbers across the top are the number of people that voted that way. So if we want to find the total number of voters, we would just need to add all of those up. So we would have the 7 plus the 5 plus the 4 plus the 2. So that adding up this top row, all of those columns, those were all of the preference ballots. So that's going to give me my total number of voters, which is 18. So 18 total people voted. Now I want to give us a definition. I want to define what's called majority. We often hear the word majority, especially when talking about things like elections and voting. And sometimes we have a slightly off definition of majority. So if I were to ask you what you think majority means, a lot of people might think the idea that it's the most, but really if I pressed you on it about what majority really means, you would be able to be more specific. Majority specifically is more than half. Majority means over 50%, more than half is what we really mean by majority. We're going to be very particular when we use that definition. So let's ask about our pizza example. So in this example with the toppings, did any topping get a majority of first choice votes? Well, we could count up how many first choice votes things had, but first, let's figure out what does it take to get majority in this example. So in this example, to find majority, remember majority is more than half. So when we ask what is majority, well, let's remember what the total was, right? The total was 18. So we need 18 divided by 2 because we're going to look at what's half. So half of the voters is 9, but remember, I need more than half. 9 doesn't cut it to have majority. So we would need at least, we'd have to go up from 9. So at least 10 votes to have majority. 10 would do it. 11 would do it, anywhere up between 10 and 18 would do it. 9 doesn't cut it, and less than 9 doesn't cut it. So now let's take a look at then, well, how many first choice votes did different toppings get? So we're just going to read that right off of the preference table over there. So if we look at, say, how many did anchovies get? Well, anchovies, notice we're only counting first choice votes. So look, they're on the top of this list. They got first choice votes here. But remember, how many does this represent? Well, it represents 7 ballots. So you need to be careful to remember to look up to see how many ballots each column represents. So anchovies got 7. Sausage got, notice they're on top in the second column, so they got 5. Let's look at pepperoni. Is an interesting one. Look at, they're on top of 2 different columns. So they are first choice for 4 voters that put them on top of their ballots, and another 2 voters who put them on top of a different arrangement of ballots, but still as first choice. So a total of 6 for pepperoni. And then don't forget, there is someone missing. We do still have mushrooms, and sad day, mushrooms was not on top of any ballot, so they would get 0 first choice votes. So now what we do is we can look at these first choice votes and we can say, well, are any of them majority? So anchovies was 7, not enough because we're looking for at least 10. Sausage was 5, pepperoni 6, and mushroom 0. So no topping got majority. So none of the things got majority, and that's actually pretty common. So when we do have elections that have more than 2 candidates, right? In this case, the candidates are the things that you're ranking. So for this one, it's toppings of pizza. It's very common to not get majority. It'd be pretty tough to get more than half of the votes. There is a technique that you could use that would say, all right, we're going to declare the winner to whoever gets majority. But what we would have to do then is, if no one gets majority, well, you'd either have to divert to another technique, or you would just have to say, all right, it's a tie and nobody wins, which is not very useful, right? Then the club just doesn't get to order pizza, I guess, or maybe they just have to order a cheese pizza. So instead, we're going to kind of weaken the idea of majority a little bit. So this is going to be our first voting method that we're going to learn. So the method is called the plurality method. And the winner, so we're going to define how to pick a winner. The winner with the plurality method is the candidate with the most first choice votes. So notice, that's why we're very specific. Majority is something much more specific. Majority is specifically more than half. Instead, we're going to weaken it to, well, just who has the most, right? Who has the largest number of them? And we're going to declare that candidate the winner. So let's see in our pizza example who the winner would end up being. So in the pizza example, we could ask who, well, I guess what would be a better word since they're pizza toppings. So what topping wins with the plurality method? Well, again, we're looking at first choice votes, which we actually already counted over here. So we could just rewrite these now. So we had already seen that anchovies had 7 first choice votes, sausage had 5, pepperoni had the 4 and the 2 for a total of 6, and mushrooms had 0. So then we're just asking, all right, who had the most? And the most, in this case, would be anchovies. So this would be anchovies with 7 votes. Oops, that got a little cut off for you, but I'll turn it a little for you. So anchovies with 7 votes. Now, this is a really interesting thing to talk about with this method a little bit. It's just to kind of analyze it, right? Think about pros and cons. Pro, it's a pretty simple method. It's a pretty straightforward method. It's easy for people to understand. However, would you be happy if anchovies was the choice that won? I'm gonna guess probably not. Maybe you were one of those 7 really anchovy fanatics. But also, let's take a look at our table and see, how did everyone else rank anchovies? Last place, last place, last place. So, the 5 people, 4 people, and 2 people, which altogether is 11 people, that was their last choice, was anchovies, and yet that's what we're getting on our pizza. Now, actually notice an interesting thing in this particular example. We made it this way on purpose to point out this issue that can come up with pluralities. 11 people is actually majority, right? It's more than 10. So a majority of people in this example are least excited about anchovies. That's their last choice, and yet it wins with plurality. So one of the drawbacks of plurality is, notice, did it really matter that people ranked their preferences? Well, no, all we used was first choice. So that's it. It's essentially the same as if we just only voted for one person, we're kind of losing all of this information, right? What was second, what was third, what was fourth, right? We're losing facts that, like, pepperoni's kind of pretty spread out, and like sausage is pretty towards the top on a lot of people's. We're just only looking at one aspect of what their preferences were. So plurality, it's a fairly simple method, which is valuable, especially when you're looking at very large scale situations, such as presidential elections. But yet it does have some issues. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at other techniques that do take ranking into consideration, and then we're going to have slightly different ways of looking for a voter or a winner, of which candidate's going to be the winner. And all of these methods are going to have pros and cons, so we'll talk about all of them. But this is our first method, and we're going to learn a total of 4, so this is the first of 4, and it's the plurality method.